And hello, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name's Tim Baghurst, and today's special guest is Joanne P. McCallie, former coach at Duke University for the women's basketball program. Coach B, thank you so much for joining me. If you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of history of how you got into coaching and what you did throughout your career.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. It's great to be here. I'm a coach by accident. I was working in downtown Chicago. I went to school to get my MBA, which I did at Auburn. And the best way to pay for that was to be a graduate assistant. I didn't think I was going to stay in coaching. It seemed very high maintenance and challenging. And so anyway, long story short, I kind of fell in love with it, got to some Final Fours as an assistant and a GA. And at 26 years old, was hired at Maine as the youngest head coach in the country at the time. So I was young, and 8 years at Maine, 7 great years at Michigan State, and then wonderful 13 years at Duke. So quite a path, lots of reasons why me, my family, and husband moved from each university. And it's been 28 great years. Championships, yes, but more importantly, the whole team, player development, with March Madness going on. Wow, I definitely miss it, and I miss the teams. And congratulations to your guys' team for a nice run there, and your women's team as well, because Brooke did an amazing job as Sue was, taking care of things. So always a fan now, always a fan.
Yeah, and Brooke actually was a guest on the show a couple months ago, and great to hear her insight. And one of the things which is unique about you and someone like Brooke is that you're high profile coaches, and a lot of coaches don't maybe have that visibility. How do you deal with the pressure of being at Duke University, where it's basketball? Everybody's talking about it all the time. You have that loss that maybe you're not supposed to have, and then all of a sudden it's disaster. Everything's over. What's going on with the program? How do you cope with that, given that you were there for over a decade?
It's well, pressure is a privilege, and you know what it is as you sign on, and you very much compartmentalize. You become very good at focusing on the task at hand and the process. You stay away from outcome-driven thinking, because that will put you up. So you move very quickly, win or lose, the lessons learned, and moving on to the next thing. And it was wonderful to be recruited. We were closer to family and moving to Durham, where we reside now. And Duke obviously is a fabulous school. So I was admitted to Duke as a student athlete back in the day. So it was wonderful to get to Duke and be able to coach. But there's no question, it's challenging. And if you're in 4 straight Elite Eights, you're kind of left alone at that point. But anything less than, there's a lot of dialogue. And there's a lot of things that people say, and that's part of it. But you do sign on for it. So you definitely at Duke, and in the Triangle in particular.
When you talk about being a head coach at somewhere like Duke, I suspect there's not just the expectation for success, but also everybody wants to come and work with you as a coach. And this is fresh in my mind because I got a phone call yesterday. And I get phone calls regularly. Hey, Dr. Baghurst, I'm in your program. Can you help me find a graduate assistantship with X, Y, and Z team? I'm just curious, how did you manage all of those? Because everybody wants to come coach with Coach P and learn from her and maybe get that step up. How do you choose who comes and works with you?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And you want people that want to work and grow with you, not people that just want to be at Duke and sort of stamp their resume. And that is not an easy concept. And I tended to stay with people that I knew prior to Duke, former players, or people that I felt more comfortable with. And so some Duke people as well. But hiring is always an incredible challenge. And when people ask me about mistakes I've made in coaching, it really would not be on the court as much as off the court. If I had made mistakes, if you're evaluating, which we all make mistakes, I would go right to hiring a couple of people here and there that maybe weren't the best fit, that cost the program in various ways. That is really when you reflect backwards. And getting each hire right is difficult. It's a difficult thing.
Do you look for somebody that has the same philosophy as you, or do you look for somebody who maybe has a different perspective to you to challenge your own thinking?
A kind of both.
Okay.
You know, depending upon their experience. I mean, it's very hard with somebody with limited experience to accept their philosophy, and you know, you listen to ideas, but they're kind of younger, right? And they're growing. But I always made it kind of a trend on my staff to have somebody older by 10 years or more, somebody who had a little bit more life experience. Al Brown comes to mind, just a famous assistant coach that I had for years at Michigan State and at Duke. And I think I had to grow into that role of then being the oldest, because I was never the oldest on my staff. After a while, it was kind of fun to have somebody else take that role.
One of the quotes I use in one of my classes is from Dawn Staley, who you obviously know well. And she talks about having to change with the times, because as you get older as a coach, and we're all getting older, we maybe don't have the same interests as what our student athletes do now. How do you maintain that relationship where you know what's going on when they may be interested in things that you really don't have an interest in or don't know anything about?
I think authenticity comes to mind, and learning what's going on in this day, whether it be through social media or other avenues. There's no question so much has changed in terms of student athletes and exposure, and being able to teach is, you know, I've always told my teams that we expect them to get better, but I am expected to get better on a daily basis. So it goes hand in hand. But learning to communicate in a variety of ways. I mean, through social media, if there's faith involved in a student athlete, being able to, you know, bring that to the table if appropriate, looking for off-court experiences. I mean, still doing simple things like walking my dog with a student athlete, you know, taking a golf cart ride, you know, getting outside the sphere of athletics or on campus. Those were some of the things that are a little bit old school, but I still think we kept and kept teaching, along with, again, the whole social media thing and handling that.
Talking about social media, one of the challenges coaches have is, one, how athletes use social media because they can get themselves in hot water. But two, how do coaches use social media, because it can be a recruiting tool. It can be a way to gain exposure for your program and maybe get more interest in your program, but at the same time, time consuming, and also situations where you can get into trouble as well. What advice would you have for coaches regarding social media?
Have somebody else do it. Very fortunate at the schools that I coach, there was a social media person. We hired a fabulous person at Duke, and Selena's still there, and she could, of course, take it all and make something of whatever I was doing. And that's really the way to do it. And then, of course, to stay off social otherwise, you know, don't try to independently get in there and do too much. Now with my social media, as I transition to Coach P for life, you know, beyond Coach P Duke, I have people also doing social media, but I have to do a little bit more to personalize it as an author now. And that's a challenge. And that's, you know, it's something you have to think a lot of. And then you realize the distraction and how much our student athletes are on these phones, you know, and the addiction that they provide. And they truly do. And you've got to turn off, and you've got to have space with it. And I know that's a challenge for all of us, not just young people.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you think about your coaching career, and you coached or head coach at 3 different places, 3 different experiences, I'm suspecting that it wasn't all wonderful. You had some challenges, 1 or 2 maybe. I wondered if you would just share maybe some of the challenges that you had, maybe not necessarily specifics, but the things that coaches maybe coming up wanting to be head coaches or those wanting to get in the profession need to be aware of and prepare to assume that these might happen to them.
Sure. I think the assessment of the situation, and what I mean by that is, are you taking over a program that has been more the bottom of the conference, and they're looking to bring it to new heights, or are you taking over a program that's already been to a Final Four and pursuing national championships? And I think one of my benefits to my story is that at Maine, it was a little bit of a rebuild. And so my philosophies and personality were very much accepted. And then when I went to Michigan State, the same was true. And in 5 years, we played for a national championship while at Michigan State. That was rather quick, a pretty incredible experience. I'm looking at Arizona women's basketball right now in the Final Four and thinking about what they did in 5 years and what we did back in 2005. And then, of course, there's that whole concept of wanting to do the ultimate, win a national championship and be a difference maker. And there's a fine margin for error there. So when I was recruited to Duke, that was really all that there was win a national title. As it turns out, the conference grew. And as you know, with Syracuse and Notre Dame, and the new schools that came into the conference, that made it much more complicated and much more challenging. So that challenge became interesting. To be successful in a conference. Louisville, again, was new. And I was kind of happy that my last year at Duke, we finished third behind Louisville and NC State. And that was actually the highest finish in the new ACC as it is. So I had a lot of growing to do as a coach within Duke, and not only pursuing that incredible national title, but at the same time making that transition to a new conference. And so when you're looking at jobs and thinking about them, one of the questions is, can you win your conference? You know, can you be successful in your conference at that time to move forward in the NCAA tournament? And again, knowing the difference between a rebuild and how there's just less, pushback. There's a lot more friction and pushback when things have gone well, and kind of everyone thinks they have a thought that they were part of why it went well. So change becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah, really interesting insight. You mentioned turning around a program or rebuilding a program. And a lot of that, yes, coaching is important, but a lot of it also comes to the talent you have on the floor. That talent comes from athletes deciding to come and work with you. That's recruiting. How did you do that at all three of your schools, knowing that there are other schools out there who want the same player, right? The UConns, the Baylors, the South Carolinas. How do you persuade them to come to your program, recognizing that all of the programs are great, all of the coaching is going to be high quality? How do you do it? It's got to be difficult.
Well, it's a 24/7, kind of experience. You're on call and you're dealing with student athletes, recruits all the time. I was more regional recruiter at Maine. At Michigan State, we got to the point that we could be regional, but then go national, especially after our NCAA tournament success. And then, of course, Duke, it was worldwide. I went to France to recruit a special player, other player, Australia. We had players more from all over the world and, of course, all over the country. And you have to have a great staff. You have to have a staff working in concert that can really understand who you are and be able to bring that to the table, because you can't be everywhere all the time. And honestly, this Zoom experience from the pandemic and what we've gone through, I think it sends a special message that that we should keep this. The idea of Zooming and reducing costs, reducing time spent, certainly going into a home is a special thing in recruiting. But initially, when you're not in the top 10 or top 5, you want to be in basically the top 3. You could, work through Zoom initially and then find your places and spaces. But getting back to your question about competition, it's incredible. Kids today too have also told me, Duke has been an academic school and balanced both, academics and athletics. And I've had kids tell me, I don't care about the academics. I just want to be a basketball player and play pro. And that is happening more often now than it ever has. And there are, you can get a great education at all schools. The thing about a Duke is it is private. You're selling the smaller classrooms and the intimacy of the education. And plus the fact that someone to your right might be from China and someone to your left might be from, Zimbabwe or something like that. So you're also that kind of diversity. But the reality is you can get a great education wherever you go. You can seek that out. And so kids today are more particular about their future and their pro opportunities.
With looking at your job title, you recruiting obviously is so important. Our guest last week talked about 10% of their time is what's actually done coaching, and 90% is all of the other things that come into play. I don't know how to ask this other than how do you stay sane with all these things going on that you have to be aware of, all these little, small fires that you have to maintain. It can be easy for a coach to just get stress levels increase, burnout possibilities. How do you try to manage that, knowing that this is coaching, this is likely to happen, stress is going to happen, I need to find a way to moderate it? I'm curious how you moderated that stress.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important to know your balance. I moderated that stress in a variety of ways. Exercise, first of all, whether it was, running, not so much running, but playing tennis or lifting weights, and having an outlet, at least somewhere to go where you weren't constantly being bombarded. So exercise, eating right, sleep habits are very important. You've got to take care of yourself. And finding that time, but also then having time, your schedule kind of goes through the day, and then trying to take off the dinner hour, the sort of 5:30 to 7:30 block where you reboot yourself. And that was important too, because then you go back to work pretty much at 7:30, you're back on the phone or Zooms or other things to catch up with. I've also enjoyed my morning time. I write in the morning. It's no secret that I've become an author. I've always liked writing. I would write about experiences in coaching, but also I would send certain texts to my players. And of course, they're not up that early, and their phones are off, but you could provide something for them to think about for the day. It could be a quote, a thought. It wasn't always to the team, sometimes to just individuals, people coming off injury, people, having moments of difficulty. A lot of that I tried to sort of put into the morning time. So by the time I got to practice noon or 1 or whenever it was, I'd already sort of prepped the student athlete or the team so that we could be beyond anything energetically that wasn't moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, just talk a little bit. You mentioned being an author. You've got a new book coming out, is out. Excuse me.
Yeah.
It's behind you. I can see it.
Can you see it? Here it is.
It's Secret Warrior, and the author, of course, is Coach B. Talk a little bit about why you decided to write this book.
Yeah, Secret Warrior is kind of a labor of love, and it's a book about a mental health journey. A coach, me, 25 years, being diagnosed bipolar, and the balance I had in coaching. And be able to work that experience to my benefit as a head coach, and also going through the challenges. It's a book about loyalty, the teams back at Maine when I was diagnosed, and what exactly they did to handle my situation. And then, of course, the kind of openings that occurred in my career at Michigan State and also at Duke because of the balance that I was able to work through. And one of my doctors actually said, Joanne, based on the therapy and the things that you've gone through, you probably are more balanced than most people out there, just because you've had to self-analyze and take a look at things. And so it's a memoir. The book's a memoir. And I had to wait to write it because when I was in the national championship at 39, when I thought I wanted to write it, I was counseled against that it would hurt my career and not allow me to be, discriminated against, of course. I mean, these things get out, and negative recruiting and things like that. So I waited until later, and then leaving Duke and stepping away from Duke seemed at the right time, very much at the right time. And the pandemic hit. And so then I began, that morning writing became much more copious. I mean, a lot. And then suddenly the book was written, and then the publisher and the whole 9 yards. So I I'm a second-time author. My first book, Choice Not Chance, was written with a co-writer, so I wasn't, quote, an author.
Right.
Secret Warrior is, I had to go through all of the first-year author editing and issues. I'm doing the Audible, which will come out in a couple of weeks. And I do think it's a book that is academic in nature relative to psychology classes in high school and in college, even first-year residents in medical school. It gives a real-life example. And I think, part of my hashtagging, again, back to social media, is that whole concept of stories over stigmas. We need to share these stories. They need to get out there. And public figures, people that have been on the big stage, need to take that lead. Another one of them is mentorship matters. We mentor, you mentor, I mentor, and that matters a great deal, especially with mental health, because you've got doctors, psychiatrists, and therapists, but you can't be with them all the time. And it's nice to have mentorship where people have gone through things. The third one is be good to you, because many times now, especially student athletes, will beat themselves up.
Yeah.
And don't know how to be good to themselves. Mm-hmm. And the fourth one, and there are four because of the Final Four. Being a Final Four coach is special, and we're in March Madness, as you know. So the fourth one talks about process, and the process to peace, meaning the process to peace of mind. And you cannot be outcome driven if you're going to be a great athlete or a great team. And if you're going to have great mental health, you can't be outcome driven either, because it's a process and a continuum. And so there's lots about sport that can work with mind and mind with sport.
Some great quotable quotes in that explanation. Thank you. Would it be fair to say that the mental health awareness in athletes and also coaches is sometimes undervalued or under considered by administration and coaches not being aware of athletes who may be struggling, and then administration not being aware of coaches who may be struggling?
Oh, I think that's very true. And I think there's an authentic way to bring that support to student athletes. And then I also think there's that other way where you're checking the box, to make sure you have a certain hire in place. If you're a visionary and you understand the value of mental health, technically athletic departments should have a psychiatrist on staff, not just a psychologist, as somebody who can really look out for the whole well-being and also know the student athletes over time, not somebody who comes for a year and then leaves, or somebody who writes books more than they do meet with student athletes. So there's the real authentic commitment, and then there's some other commitments. And I think the Power 5 schools in particular could be a whole lot better on their approach. And I think that mentorship and maybe a coach, like myself, who's kind of come out with it, can be somewhat of a bridge, somewhere. But I do know that the coaches are afraid. Coaches will not come out with it. I am quite sure there are mental health issues with coaches, and bipolar some, there's no question. The job is practically bipolar in its nature, any coaching job. Student athletes are being brave. Some of the WNBA players in particular, you saw Kevin Love, come out with his story, Shamika Holtzclaw with hers. And now some of the student athletes in the WNBA are really doing a remarkable job with advocacy for equity, for so many concepts. But at the same time, telling their stories more. And it's becoming more accepted, but I don't believe it's becoming more accepted with coaches. And if I can be there, some kind of liaison as I do this work, I would love to do that.
You make great points. And I think athletes are afraid of the coach because they may cut me, or I may get less playing time, or I may be judged differently. And then the coach is doing exactly the same thing when they look up above them and see, well, this may affect my contract or whether I keep my job.
Yeah.
It definitely is an area. You and I spoke about this beforehand. We need to raise awareness, and we need to be asking those questions rather than just assuming everybody's okay. And
Yes, yeah. And in this day and age, I mean, the pandemic has really woken everybody up. I mean, now there's, the "Are you okay? Are you good?" T-shirts. There's all these things that have happened, but it's taken the pandemic to shake the world, and to say life is valuable. You have one mind, you have one body, and what do you plan on doing with it? And the pandemic had not really hit us. My book was sort of already finished, and at the very end of it, the pandemic hit, and things really got shut down. And I'm sort of amazed by that timing because of the story being told, and then of course now this sort of drive we have to see what's happened to the students, the student athletes, particularly in high school, AAU, and others. And I've had Zooms, and wow. I mean, it is eye-opening what these young people have been through and what are the long-term effects of it. Because, just there's a whole lot of issues relative to routine and all these things. And kids have really struggled without the human connection.
We've got a question in the chat box, and somebody I think Dr. Tim Rice, he said, many times folks think that athletes need help from a sports psychology professional. No disagreement there. Question is, would you say that coaches need one also?
Oh, yes. And I think that's harder because coaches, can be humble, but the vulnerability piece is really tough. And so I want to say that it would need to be, I think, more private. And for example, going in and out of the same room, student athlete comes out, coach goes in, it sort of breeds this distrust, of course, of some bizarre collaboration. And so the reality is, yes, I feel like therapists are fabulous, and I wish everybody had one. And coaches, to me, if they can, outside of the arena that they operate in. But I will say this, that if you've got a great psychiatrist, sports psychiatrist type of thing at your school, then just getting some hints on how to handle student athletes, not the details, not the HIPAA stuff, but the hints on how to handle various student athletes, that's important. And that's covered in the book. I mean, the book is not just about mental health. It's about championships, communication, connection, loyalty, and all the factors that go into things, with sort of the mental health story around it.
So to summarize your career, it's expansive. You've been at multiple programs, you've built programs, you've come in and really expanded programs from where they were at or continued that success. If you're thinking back to maybe when you were first starting out as a coach, maybe didn't know as much as you do now. And I know there's a lot of coaches out there who are going, man, what advice would Coach P give me today if I wanted to be successful? And how we define success, as you know, is relative. And in American society, we look at the wins and losses, but we also can see success comes in many other ways too. What advice, 2 or 3 things, would you tell a coach who's trying to come up and really grow in this profession?
Yeah. First of all, it's a lifestyle. Okay. So it's not a profession. It's not a business. And if you want to use the term business, it's the business of developing people. And so you've got to love the fact that there are no hours and you work by objectives. And at any time you're sort of on call for the student athletes because lots of different things come up off the court, and you have to love that. So it has to be very much a family, a type of environment. I would tell my old self to slow down a little bit, to allow myself to really enjoy the process. There were times I was in my home state and trying to be the everything wonder, mother, a wife, a coach. It's no surprise that in my second year of being a head coach, no, I'm sorry, not my second year, my 4th year being a head coach, that things had caught up to me. And when I was 30 years old, I had to deal with my diagnoses. So slowing down, staying in the moment, and also doing a very good job with hiring and scheduling. Scheduling is very tactical in terms of how when you play opponents and who you play, but really doing a good job with your hiring and your vetting of people and finding out are they working with you and for you? And are you able to lead them? And is that the fit? I can't say enough about that, because the human connection is the critical piece, and you've got to have that. And when you first start out, it's not like you have all these former players. Former players are great hires often because they know the ins and outs. But when you start out, you've got to find people that may have been your former players and people that you can really trust. So those are some things I would encourage. And again, don't compromise on your own space of health, the way you take care of yourself, the exercise, the quality of your life, that type of thing.
Thank you so much for sharing your advice and experiences with all of us today, and for those watching in future. If somebody wanted to kind of find out a little bit more about you, get in touch with you, maybe they have a question, want to know more about your book, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm pretty accessible, working with different teams and consulting and that type of thing. And that's just through Joanne McCallie at gmail.com, getting requests right through my email, and Coach P for Life on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, of course. Secret Warrior, finding that on Amazon, being able to see what that's about more. That's always, that's a lot of what we're doing right now. But I'm definitely reachable and trying to work on this whole bridge between, helping those in sport and giving the support that perhaps I am somewhat qualified to give. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but yet a mentor who has 28 years that can offer something somewhere.
Well, it's certainly valued and needed. And I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And of course, anybody watching, just a reminder, each and every week we have a guest on. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and of course, Coach P, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.